Welcome to Cursed TV, where shadows whisper and the night comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. Turn off the lights, relax, and let the stories begin. New Haven was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled in the foothills of a forgotten mountain range, it was a town that had seen generations pass through its streets without ever really changing. The smell of pine and earth lingered in the air, and the hills, like old sentinels, watched over the sleepy community. There was a local diner where everyone gathered, exchanging small talk and gossip over coffee served in chipped mugs with your name engraved on the side. It was warm, it was familiar, people cared for each other here. Yet, beneath that facade of simple comfort, New Haven harbored a darkness that no one. I had grown up here, my family, my friends, my entire existence was tied to this place. On the surface, it was idyllic. The kind of town where neighbors knew each other's names, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. But no one ever mentioned the strange events that unfolded every night, not openly anyway. It was the unspoken rule of the town. You never discussed the lockdown. I had first noticed it when I was young. I must have been around 10 years old when I first stayed up late, sneaking around the house when everyone else was fast asleep. I had always been an inquisitive child, never able to follow the rules without questioning them. That night my curiosity led me to the window where I saw the streets of New Haven deserted, shrouded in an eerie silence. It was a silence that felt wrong, unnatural. There was no breeze, no rustling of leaves, not even the chirping of crickets. The town, usually so full of life, seemed to have frozen in time. It started at 11:38 p.m. every night, without fail. The doors slammed shut, and the windows rattled as if some unseen force was pushing against them. People who were still outside hurriedly retreated to their homes, locking everything up behind them. There was no warning, no explanation, just an overwhelming compulsion to stay indoors. The entire town was trapped, bound by some unseen rule that governed this strange, silent ritual. At first I had assumed it was just a curfew, a quirk of small-town life. But as I grew older, I started to realize that it was something far more sinister. There was a presence in the air during those 12 minutes, a palpable sense of dread that settled over the town. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it, like a weight pressing against your chest, suffocating you. It was as though something was out there, watching, waiting for a crack in the facade, a moment of weakness. My parents never spoke about it directly. Whenever I would ask why we had to stay inside, why the town locked down every night, their answer was always the same. It's for the safety of everyone. It's just the way things are. They never seemed to be afraid. They just accepted it. But I couldn't. There was something about it that felt wrong, something that gnawed at me from the inside. One night, when I was 14, I decided to stay up again, more curious than ever. It was 11:35 p.m. when I heard the hum, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then it moved. It wasn't an animal nor a person. It was something else entirely, something that didn't belong. Its movements were erratic, jerky, as though its body was not entirely in control. The street lights flickered, casting shadows that danced along the pavement. and for a moment I thought I saw its eyes. It was fleeting, a glimpse, a flash of movement, and then it was gone, but the feeling lingered, that gut-wrenching sense that something was terribly wrong. The next day I asked my parents what it had been. They just shook their heads and told me to stop worrying. Nothing happened, nothing to be afraid of, they said, their voices tight as though they were trying to convince themselves more than me. As the years passed, I tried to push the memory of that night to the back of my mind. I pretended to forget about the strange presence, about the lockdowns, about the fear that crept into my bones whenever the clock struck 11:38 p.m., but deep down I knew it was still there, watching, waiting. It wasn't until recently that I saw it again, but this time it was different. This time it was personal. The night started like any other. The town was quiet, the sky deep navy blue, stars scattered like forgotten memories. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, trying to keep my mind occupied. But then I noticed something. My cat, Jasper, was nowhere to be found. I searched the house, calling his name softly into the silence, but there was no answer. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, and soon it was 11:36 p.m. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The familiar sense of dread settled over me. I knew what was coming, and then I heard a faint scratching sound from outside. I rushed to the window, my heart racing, and I saw him, Jasper, walking calmly along the sidewalk, oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond the horizon. I had never let him outside at night, never allowed him to roam free, but there he was, far too close to the edge of town, where the darkness seemed to swallow everything in its path. Without thinking, I ran outside. It was stupid, I knew it was, but I couldn't just leave him out there. I had to bring him inside before it was too late. As I sprinted toward him, something shifted in the air. The temperature dropped, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. The street lights flickered again, and the silence grew oppressive. I reached out to grab Jasper, to pull him back to safety. When it happened, I felt it, a presence, something enormous, something malevolent. It was behind me, closing in. Jasper hissed and darted away, but I was frozen in place, staring at the darkness that loomed just beyond the street lights. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was out there, and it was coming for me. I stood frozen, my legs trembling beneath me, as the world around me seemed to hold its breath. The street lights flickered, their feeble light casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat a deafening echo in the heavy silence that had fallen over New Haven. I didn't move. I couldn't move. The presence was suffocating, pressing against me like a wave of cold, suffocating air. The town my home felt miles away, swallowed by the looming darkness. The hum from earlier had returned, but now it was more pronounced, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. It was unmistakable now. This wasn't just a quirk of the night. Something was coming, something that didn't belong. From the corner of my eye I saw Jasper scramble up the porch steps, his fur bristling, his eyes wide with terror. But I couldn't look away from the darkened street ahead. There, standing at the edge of the light, was the figure. It was massive, a twisted silhouette barely visible in the darkness. Its shape seemed to distort, shifting unnaturally, like it was stretching and warping in ways that defied reason. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. I knew that face, I knew that form. That disturbing, otherworldly movement. It was the thing I had seen so many years ago, the thing that haunted every darkened corner of my memory. The creature was here. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My voice was lodged somewhere deep inside me, trapped by a primal fear that rooted me to the spot. My body screamed to run, to flee, but my legs refused to obey. It was as if my very soul was paralyzed, locked in place by the thing watching me from the darkness. Then it moved, slowly, impossibly slow, as though savoring the moment. It stepped forward. Its body jerked, like it was forcing itself into motion, as if it couldn't control its own movements. Its limbs seemed too long, too thin, the joints bending at odd angles, making it appear like something that was never meant to exist. Its face, or what I could make out of it, was a grotesque mask of distorted features, twisted into a semblance of something human but wrong. Its eyes, if you could call them, that glowed with a sickly yellow light, like the burning embers in the abyss. They were locked onto me, and the intensity of its gaze sent a shiver of ice down my spine. The creature's mouth opened. A low, guttural sound rumbled from deep within its chest. It wasn't a growl or a howl, but a whisper that reverberated through the air and into my very soul, carrying with it a hunger, a deep, unrelenting hunger that gnawed at me, making my skin crawl and my muscles ache to run. But I couldn't. I was frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from that terrible, haunting gaze. The whisper grew louder, almost imperceptible at first, but slowly becoming clearer. It wasn't speaking in words, not exactly. It was more like a thought, a feeling, pressing against my mind. "It's too late for you." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. This thing, it wasn't just hunting for food. It was hunting for something deeper, something more primal. Then, as if waking from a trance, I heard the sound of footsteps, light footsteps, quick and frantic. Jasper, he was back, standing at the door, staring at me with wide, fearful eyes. He knew something was wrong. He knew what I knew, that whatever that thing was, it didn't belong here. I snapped out of my stupor and, with a final, desperate scream, I turned to run. My feet moved instinctively, but my mind was still clouded by the creature's presence, still vibrating with its unnatural energy. The air felt thick, as if I was swimming through it, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could hear the thing behind me, its movement slow and deliberate, like it was toying with me, savoring the chase. I didn't dare look back, not even once. I could feel it, its presence closing in, filling the street with a crushing weight. The sound of its movement was impossible to ignore, like the wet slap of rubber on concrete, a grotesque, unnatural rhythm that echoed in my mind. I knew it was gaining on me. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I made it to the alley between two houses, breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I pressed myself against the wall, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The darkness here was different, more suffocating, more alive. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I strained to listen for any sound, any movement. The streets were unnervingly quiet, the world holding its breath, as if it, too, was waiting for something terrible to happen. And then I heard it, the creature's whispers again, low and slithering, wrapping around me like a vice. "You can't escape. It's already here, and it will always find you." I clamped my hands over my ears, desperate to block out its voice, but the words seeped into my mind, into my bones, into the very fabric of my existence. The silence returned, only this time it was different. It was colder. It was emptier. When I finally dared to peek around the corner, I saw it. The street was deserted once more. No sign of the creature. No movement in the shadows. But I knew it was still out there, watching. I stumbled back into my house, the door slamming shut behind me with a violent bang. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the lock. Inside, everything felt off. The air was thick, like something had shifted. The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that isn't comforting, it's oppressive. Like the whole town was holding its breath. Jasper darted into the living room, his fur standing on end, his eyes wide with fear. He hadn't said a word since I'd brought him inside. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing, my body still trembling. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, lurking, waiting for the next 12 minutes, waiting for me, but something had changed. Something inside me was different now. I could feel it. It was only a matter of time before it came back. The following days in New Haven passed by in a haze. It felt like I was living in a fog, my mind unable to process what had happened the night before. I couldn't shake the feeling that the thing I had encountered was still out there, working just beyond the veil of what was normal. It haunted me, not just in the dark hours of the night, but in the daylight too. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should. Every creak in the floorboards seemed to amplify, as if the house itself was whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I had thought the worst was over, that whatever I had seen outside was just some sick nightmare, a figment of my imagination, brought on by too many late-night horror stories. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something wrong with this town, something ancient and sinister that no one dared to confront. Something that had been festering in the shadows for far too long. I couldn't stay. I knew that now. I had to leave. But even as the thought crossed my mind, a deep sense of dread settled in my stomach. Where could I go? This thing, this presence, it wasn't confined to one street or one town. I had seen it, felt it. I knew it was always watching, waiting. It was like the walls of New Haven held it in, kept it bound by some twisted, invisible force. But once you saw it, once you knew, there was no escaping it, not ever. It was only when I began packing my bags, the weight of my decision pressing down on me, that I realized how far gone things truly were. The town, despite its charm, its sleepy rhythm, was a prison, not because of the curfew, not because of the lockdowns. It was a prison because of what it kept hidden, what it allowed to roam free every night. By the time evening arrived, the streets of New Haven were already beginning to empty. People were in their homes, going about their routines, trying to ignore the fact that nightfall meant something else. I too, was locked inside my house, sitting in the dim light of the living room, staring at the door, listening for the slightest sound. The silence outside was suffocating as the clock ticked toward 11:30. I felt the familiar cold creeping into the corners of my mind. I knew what was coming, and I couldn't escape it. The fear that had been festering in the back of my mind for years was finally coming to the forefront, threatening to overwhelm me. I tried to focus on anything else, on packing, on moving, on the future, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. I couldn't help myself. It was almost 11:38 p.m. when I saw the first sign. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees like some ancient, mournful thing. The street lights flickered, casting long, unsettling shadows across the front lawn. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew what was about to happen, and this time I couldn't escape. I watched as the town began to shut down. The doors of every house in the street slammed shut, windows rattling as they locked into place. The sounds of the night faded away, leaving only the hum of the creature's presence, a deep, vibrating pulse that seemed to fill the air. It was here again, the thing that stalked New Haven, the thing that had stalked me for years. I turned away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. It felt as though my body was reacting to the presence before my mind could process it. I could feel the walls closing in around me. It wasn't safe here. It had never been. The fear that had always been a low hum in the background of my mind was now a roar, deafening and consuming. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, a harsh, jarring sound that ripped through the silence like a knife. I froze. No one had ever come to visit at this time of night. The visitors, the ones who didn't follow the rules, the ones who dared to stay out too late, were always the ones who vanished. The ringing of the doorbell was like a death knell, a warning that something terrible was about to happen. I approached the door slowly, my hands shaking uncontrollably. There was a sick, twisted feeling in my gut, a sensation that this was it, the point of no return, the thing outside, whatever it was, had come from me. I looked through the peephole. There was no one there. The street outside was emptied, just like it always was at this hour. Yet I knew better. I could feel it, the presence, the hunger. It was waiting for me, for any crack in the defenses, for any sign of weakness. Suddenly the sound came again, soft, hesitant taps on the window, just as I had heard before. And then the scratching, the claws dragging against the glass. I didn't need to look to know what it was. I had seen it once before, and I never wanted to see it again. But it was here, right outside my window. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to leave, but where could I go? How could I escape the thing that had been stalking me all these years? I had left New Haven, yes, but it had followed me. The creature didn't just haunt the town, it haunted me, and now it was here. The night stretched on, the clock ticking closer to 11:50 p.m. The fear was suffocating, thick in the air, wrapping around my body, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to call out, to break free from the grip of terror that held me in place. But all I could do was wait. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The scratching ceased. The taps on the window stopped. The street outside was still. The clock read 11:50 p.m. I wasn't sure if it was over. I wasn't sure if it had left or if it was just waiting for me to lower my guard. All I knew was that I had made a terrible mistake. The creature had followed me. It always would. And now the only thing left to do was wait for the next night. The next day was a blur. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt truly awake. Every thought, every action felt like I was moving through a dream, too afraid to let myself fully wake up and face the reality of what was happening. The feeling of being watched never left me. It lingered in the back of my mind, like a shadow that refused to fade no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. I went about my day as if nothing had changed. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, staring blankly at the walls, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I was just waiting for the inevitable. The creature was out there, somewhere, always lurking in the dark, always just beyond the edge of the light. The clock ticked forward, time seemed to stretch, each minute heavier than the last. As nightfall approached, I felt the familiar chill settle in my chest. I couldn't help it. I was already bracing for what was to come. I couldn't stop thinking about the whispers from the night before. It's already here, you can't escape. I had tried to talk myself out of it, tried to convince myself that it was just fear, just the remnants of some twisted nightmare. But as I stared at the clock, the minutes seemed to crawl, and I knew that soon the familiar dread would return. 11:38 p.m. I couldn't escape it. The dread that filled the town, that filled my very soul, was too much. I could feel it in my bones, in the air around me. I knew it was coming, the creature, the presence, the thing that haunted New Haven, the thing that never left. The door slammed shut, the windows rattled in their frames. It was happening again. I sat there, motionless, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to breathe, tried to steady myself, but my body refused to cooperate. I could feel my pulse racing, my hands trembling. I knew I was safe inside, but the safety was an illusion. It had always been an illusion. I stood up slowly, my legs weak beneath me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for it to come again, for it to find me. I couldn't be trapped in this cycle of terror, day after day, night after night. I rushed to the window, my eyes scanning the street. It was empty, just like always, but I knew better. I could feel it, its presence just beyond the light, just beyond the glass, and then I saw it. It wasn't in the street, it wasn't in the shadows, it was in the reflection. I stared, wide-eyed, at the window pane. For a moment I thought I was imagining things, that I was just seeing what I feared, not the reality. But then the reflection shifted. A twisted figure standing just outside the frame of the window. It was so close, I could feel its breath on my skin, even though I knew it wasn't really there. I could see it in the glass, its distorted features, its glowing eyes. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even human. It was something worse, something that shouldn't exist. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. My gaze was locked in place, drawn to the reflection as if it had a hold on me, pulling me in. Its form blurred, shifting, like it was tearing through the fabric of reality itself. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. The creature's mouth open, its jagged teeth gleaming in the reflection. It didn't need to speak. I knew what it wanted. I knew what it had always wanted. It wanted me. My heart raced, my chest constricted with fear. I tried to move, to scream, but my body refused to listen. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I was paralyzed, caught in the grip of its malevolent presence. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the reflection vanished. The creature was gone, the window was empty, just a pane of glass reflecting my own terrified face. But the feeling remained. It was still out there, watching, waiting. I stumbled back from the window, my legs finally giving way beneath me. I sank to the floor, gasping for air. I had to leave. I had to get out of here, but I couldn't. I was trapped by the thing that haunted me, trapped by the town that had held me in its grip for so long. And that's when I realized the truth. It wasn't just the town that had kept me here. It was the creature. It had always been here. It had always been watching. I had thought I could escape, that moving away would free me from it. But it had followed me, it had found me again, and it wasn't going to let me go. I tried to steady myself, tried to calm my racing thoughts. I had to make a plan. I had to find a way out. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no way out. Not for me, not for anyone who had seen it, who had felt its presence. It was too late. The thing had already marked me. The clock struck 11:50 p.m., and once again the streets fell silent. The creature was gone. But I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. It was just waiting for the next night, the morning after the creature had appeared in the reflection. Everything felt wrong. It was like the world was still vibrating with the echo of its presence. The air had a thick, oppressive quality, like it was weighted down with something unseen. Even the sunlight, which should have felt warm and comforting, seemed pale and distant, as if it too was afraid to touch the town. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, its glowing eyes, its twisted form, its hunger. It haunted every corner of my mind, gnawing at me, filling every waking moment with dread. The thing was still out there, and it had found me. I could feel it, lurking just beyond the edge of my consciousness, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I tried to go about my day as if nothing had happened, tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, but every sound, every movement set my nerves on edge. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I couldn't stop checking the windows, the doors, every crack and crevice in the walls. It wasn't safe here. It wasn't safe anywhere. By the time night fell again, I knew what was coming, the silence, the fear, the creature. I had no choice but to prepare. I couldn't be caught off guard again. I couldn't let it find me unprotected. The clock struck 11:30 p.m., and I began to pace. The weight of the coming night settled over me like a stone. The darkness outside pressed in on the walls, and I felt it again, the presence. It was out there, watching, waiting. The town had locked itself down. People were inside, hiding behind their doors, pretending everything was normal, pretending that the creature wasn't out there, stalking in the night. But I knew better. We all did. And tonight I wasn't going to pretend. The clock ticked toward 11:38 p.m. I grabbed the kitchen knife, my fingers shaking as I gripped the handle. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The fear was suffocating. The creature was going to come. It always did. But this time, I wouldn't just sit there and wait for it to find me. This time I was going to fight back. At 11:38 p.m., the familiar sounds of the town locking down echoed through the house. The doors slammed shut. The windows rattled. The hum in the air returned, low and vibrating. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the sound of the world around me closing in, trapping me inside. And then the tapping began. It was soft at first, like a distant knock on the window, but I knew better. I could feel the creature, its presence drawing closer, creeping toward me. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like claws scratching against the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see it again, but I knew I had to. I slowly approached the window, the knife gripped tightly in my hand. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. I could hear the creature, feel it, pressing against the glass, its hunger radiating through the air. I forced myself to look. The window was dark, the reflection of my face staring back at me. But then something shifted, a shadow, a movement, and I saw it. The creature, it was no longer just a figure. It was something more, something real. It was pressing against the glass, its twisted form contorting in unnatural ways, its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Its gaze held me in place, like a weight pressing against my chest, and then it spoke, not with words, but with something deeper, a voice that didn't come from its mouth, but from the walls around me. It was a whisper, a cold, clammy whisper that crawled into my mind and made my skin crawl. You can't escape, you can't hide, you belong to me. The voice was everywhere, in my head and the walls. In the very air I breathed. I wanted to scream, to run, to break free from the suffocating grip it had on me. But I couldn't. The creature had found me, and it wasn't going to let go. I backed away from the window, my legs weak, my heart racing. The creature was still there, still watching, its presence filling the room. I could feel it moving through the walls, its form twisting and shifting like it was made of shadow and nightmare. The voice came again, but this time it wasn't a whisper, it was a roar, a deafening sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. The walls shook, the floor trembled, the sound was everywhere, coming from inside my head, from inside the very walls of the house you will never leave. I fell to my knees, the knife slipping from my hand. I couldn't stop shaking. My mind was unraveling, pieces of reality slipping away like sand through my fingers. I had no idea what was real anymore. Was it the creature? Was it the house? Or was it all just part of some twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from? I could feel it closing in, the walls pressing against me, the voice echoing in my mind, louder and louder. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but all I could do was whisper to myself, a mantra that I didn't believe. I have to survive, I have to survive. But I knew it was too late. It had already found me. The walls trembled. The air felt thick with the creature's presence, its voice wrapping around my mind like an iron vice. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to push back the fear, tried to hold on to some semblance of control, but it was slipping, like trying to grasp water in my hands. The sound of the creature's roar echoed in my head, reverberating through the house, making everything feel unstable, unreal. I couldn't think, I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own mind, imprisoned by the creature's power. But then, in the midst of the chaos, something broke through. The faintest sound of a door creaking open, a noise so small, so insignificant, that I almost didn't hear it, but it was enough to snap me back into some kind of focus, to remind me that I still had control over my actions, that I could still make a choice. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs shaking like a newborn deer's, my breath shallow. The knife, where had I left it? I had no idea. But it didn't matter now. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep hiding. The creature had made it clear there was no escape. But that didn't mean I couldn't fight. I stumbled toward the door, the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. The hallway seemed longer than it should be, the shadows stretching, warping in unnatural ways. The fear clung to me, weighed me down, but I pushed forward. Each step was like wading through water, thick and heavy. And then I saw it, the window at the end of the hallway, the very window where the creature had first shown itself to me, the window where it had whispered its hunger into my soul. I had to face it. I had to know if it was real. if I was losing my mind, or if there was something more sinister going on here. I reached for the curtains, my heart racing as I pulled them back, my fingers trembling. The reflection in the glass was my own, nothing else. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew it wasn't as simple as that. The air in the room grew cold, my breath visible as I exhaled, the frost creeping across the glass, and then, as though summoned by my very thoughts, the creature's reflection appeared beside mine. Its twisted form was more distinct now, more tangible, its head tilted to the side, its eyes glowing with that sickly yellow hue that sent a shiver down my spine. It seemed to grin at me, its face distorting further, the grotesque smile stretching unnaturally across its features. The very sight of it made my stomach lurch, my pulse spiking. I turned away from the window, my hands pressing against the walls as I tried to steady myself. My mind was a blur of panic. I could feel the creature inside my head now, its presence an invasive force, worming its way into my thoughts. The whispers were louder now, growing clearer. You think you can run, but I'm inside you now. I'm inside everyone. No one is safe, not even you. The walls closed in on me, the house seeming to bend and shift around me. I wasn't sure where I was anymore, whether the house was real or if the creature had taken control of everything. I reached for the door again, but my hand faltered, unable to open it. There was no way out, no escape. The cold grew worse, the temperature in the room dropped rapidly, the air turning heavy with a suffocating weight. I looked around, my eyes frantic, desperate to find some answer, some way to break free, but there was nothing. Suddenly, a real voice got through the fog of terror. It was low, familiar, but distant, a whisper from the dark. Don't let it win. I froze. The voice, where had it come from? It didn't sound like anyone I knew. And yet, it was like it knew exactly what I was feeling, knew the fear that was consuming me. Who's there? I whispered, my voice trembling. There was no response at first, just the sound of the house creaking, the wind howling outside. But then the voice spoke again, softer this time, but with more urgency. Wake up, you're not alone. It was as if a switch had been flipped in my mind. For the first time in what felt like forever, clarity returned. I wasn't just a victim. I wasn't just the prey to this thing. There had to be a way to fight back. I glanced around the room, my eyes now sharp and focused. I couldn't let it consume me. I couldn't let it win. I walked toward the window again, this time not with fear, but with resolve. The creature's reflection still lurked, waiting. But this time something in me changed. I wasn't backing down. Get out, I whispered to the reflection. You don't belong here. The air seemed to shift. The house groaned, and for a moment I felt as though something in the fabric of reality itself had cracked. A faint light flickered from the window, and the reflection of the creature wavered, distorted, like it was being pulled away by an invisible force. Then, for a split second, I saw it behind the creature, a shadow, a figure standing still. Watching, the figure stepped forward, and I realized that it wasn't the creature at all. It was me. In the reflection, I saw myself. But it wasn't just me. It was something more, something that wasn't afraid anymore. It was as though the creature was feeding off my fear, my doubts. But now it was being starved. The house went silent. The creature was gone. But I knew, deep in my soul, that it wasn't over. The creature wasn't gone. It wasn't vanquished. But for the first time I knew that I could fight back. It had taken something from me, my peace, my sanity, my safety, but I wasn't going to let it take everything. I wasn't going to let it win. The battle wasn't over. But at least, for tonight, I had won. The silence that followed felt unreal, as if time itself had frozen, holding its breath, waiting for something that never came. The creature was gone, or so I thought. But even though the room had returned to an eerie stillness, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just a temporary reprieve. The battle had only shifted, not ended. I could feel it lingering deep in my bones. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. I walked slowly through the house, the oppressive air that had once suffocated me now hanging lightly around me. The fear was still there, still crawling under my skin, but it wasn't as suffocating as before. I knew what I had to do. I knew now that this creature, this presence, it wasn't just tied to this house. It wasn't tied to this town either. It had been following me, pulling me into its grasp, feeding off my fear. But it had to be confronted, and I was the one who had to do it. I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The creature had been here, had moved through these walls, through these very rooms. It had twisted them, warped them into something that felt wrong, foreign, like the house itself had become its own prison. But now, with the strange strength that had awakened within me, I knew I wasn't alone. There was a whisper in the air, not the creature's voice this time, but something different, familiar, distant. A memory, a presence that had been with me longer than I realized. Don't let it control you. You are stronger than it. The voice wasn't just a whisper this time. It was a command, firm and certain. I knew this voice. It was my own, from deep within. The part of me that had been buried under layers of fear, of terror, was finally awake. The thing that had tried to feed off me, to consume me, was not just a physical creature. It was a manifestation of my own weakness, my own terror. I stood still, letting the stillness of the house seep into me. I needed to remember something. Something that my mind had blocked out for so long. The creature had thrived because I had given it power. I had allowed it to grow, to take root in my fear. I had been living in a cage of my own making, thinking I had no escape. But I did. I always had. The clock ticked softly in the background. I glanced at it. 11:45 p.m. I took a deep breath. I had always been running, always hiding. But I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't hide behind the walls of this house or the distance of the town. This thing, this terror, wasn't bound by the space around me. It was bound to me. I had to face it, confront it head on, or it would consume everything with a sudden clarity. I turned toward the back door. I knew now that the house wasn't the enemy. It had become the battleground. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, its walls closing in again. But this time I wasn't afraid. I reached for the door handle, hesitated for only a moment, and then threw it open. The air outside was cold, sharp, and crisp. The town was shrouded in darkness, the street lights dim and flickering like ghosts. The familiar silence of the town felt different, naughty, like something had changed. The creature wasn't just out there in the darkness. It was everywhere, but this time I was ready. I took a step forward, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last. But I didn't stop. I was walking into the very heart of it, the creature's domain. It wasn't just waiting in the shadows anymore. It was everywhere, pressing in on me from all sides. But I wasn't afraid. The fear, the weight that had once shackled me, was gone. The creature appeared in front of me as I knew it would, but it wasn't the same as before. It was still monstrous, its form twisted and wrong, its features distorted and nightmarish. But now, instead of terror, I felt a strange calm. I knew what it was, I knew what it represented. "You can't escape me," it hissed, its voice cold and distorted. "I'm not trying to escape," I said, my voice steady. "I'm facing you, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." The creature growled, its massive form shifting as it moved toward me, but I didn't back away. Instead, I stood my ground, my body tense, ready. It lunged, but I was ready. In one fluid motion, I raised my hand, and as though summoned by my will, a surge of energy pulsed through me. A bright, blinding light erupted from within, shattering the darkness that surrounded us. The creature recoiled, its screech of pain filling the air. It tried to retreat, but the light burned it, driving it back with every step it took. "You were never in control," I whispered. "I was." With one final, powerful pulse, the creature shattered, its form dissolving into the night air, leaving nothing but an empty, silent street in its wake. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, my heart pounding. The silence that followed was not the same as before. It was peaceful, quiet like the calm after a storm. The weight that had clung to my chest, the terror that had followed me for so long, was finally gone. I had faced the creature, but more importantly, I had faced the darkness inside me, the fear that had taken root in my heart. The thing that had fed it was finally gone. The town of New Haven stood silent around me, but for the first time in my life, I was no longer trapped in its shadow. And though I knew the creature was gone, I knew that its lesson would stay with me forever.